Okay. Welcome to the conversation on the future of travel at the globally curated Reinventaissance event. Reinventaissance was the inspiration of Megan and her team really to share stories about pivots, reinventions, success stories, and kind of new ideas that sprung out of the craziness of 2020. And so, what we want to do today is celebrate how we've all pivoted and changed and reinvented in the field of travel, and what does the future of travel look like. So, I'll give my guests here, my panelists, a chance to introduce themselves. But I'm Sandhya Sudhakar. I am a new entrepreneur. I actually started a business in 2020, which is quite on brand with the theme of Reinventaissance. My business is Aperture Culture, and is inspired by the idea for anyone out there, photographers. John, I know you know that word quite well. An aperture is a part of the camera where you can decide how much light to let in. And so for Aperture Culture, it's really all about how can we all let more light in, and then as we all do our own individual work and become our brightest and most enlightened selves, that we can raise the collective consciousness of the culture. And so I do consulting and coaching, mainly in the workspace, working with people on career development, how you can do some deep self-exploration to understand yourself better and bring that into the work that you're doing, designing the career of your dreams, or just finding ways to make a current company or a corporate world work better for you. So one of the inspirations for starting a business for me was that so I could move around the world and be in different locations and work from a lot of different places. I love to travel myself, and it's my dream to spend a month in different countries at different times of the year. And so quite appropriate for the discussion we're about to get into today around the future of travel. So I will toss the mic over to Jonathan Kalan first and have you introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do in the travel space? And why don't you tell us about one kind of pivot or reinvention that you've made in your business this year?
Ooh, only one. That's a tough one. Hey, everybody. Super happy to have you here. And hey, to everybody watching this on recording later. Nice to sort of see you in the time-space continuum change. So yes, I'm Jonathan Kalan. I have had an interesting life and career, really focusing on, I think, the intersection of perspective and experience and travel and media and entrepreneurship, many, many things. But before running what I currently run, which is a company called Unsettled, which I'll share a bit about, I work as a foreign correspondent, as a journalist, as a photographer across Africa and the Middle East, covering many countries. I've started a couple different companies in media and technology, and now Unsettled, where what do we do at Unsettled? We ask really big questions, mostly around the future of how we live and work and travel and build community in the 21st century. So we run experiences for groups of about 25 to 30 people for about 1 month at a time. It varies. In places like Bali, Cape Town, South Africa, Buenos Aires, Tuscany, and others, that really give people a chance to live and work in a different way. So we call it co-living and co-working. But it's much more than that. It's about exploring questions of how do we show up in the world, given what's possible, how do we kind of adapt to this new way of living more mobily, more remotely, and do that with a really intentional and interesting community. So we have been doing that for about 5 years. We've got some incredible alumni all over the world, including your wonderful moderator right here. And Evan maybe soon, I think, will be. That's a little bit about me. One big pivot. Oh, I think in 2020, we really embraced B2B. So we really embraced working with companies more than working with individuals, because up until this point in our history, well, we have done some different experiences and such with businesses and companies. We worked with like Pratt Institute and universities, running trips for them and that kind of thing. We really went full on and started designing experiences for large companies in a whole new way, in a virtual environment, though we had been doing virtual before 2020, but not long. So it was a big change, a lot of learnings with it, a lot of interesting things that came about. And I'll hold for now because we'll probably dive much more into it. So am I passing the mic or am I passing it to you to pass the mic?
Yes, no, we're passing it to Evan. Evan, why don't you introduce yourself? Same
Got it.
questions.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Sandhya. My name is Evan. Hello to everybody in the room and in future rooms listening, watching this. Thanks for joining. So my background actually comes from festivals. I used to organize and produce music festivals, food festivals, you name it, festivals across the United States, some in England, a couple other countries, and was very fortunate to have been a part of developing some from the ground up from the very beginning, and also coming in and helping some of the more reputable ones kind of continuously innovate and stay interesting and exciting. And about 10 years into that line of work, decided to take a leave of absence. It was going to be a 3-month sabbatical that I went on. And of course, once I hit the road, it turned into eventually a 1.5 years of traveling. And while I was out on the road, fell into volunteering at a couple hospitality businesses in Myanmar, Thailand, Taiwan. And that's when, hey, Michaela, you made it. And that's when I really discovered this entire world of hospitality and realized that that was going to be where I wanted to spend at least the next phase, if not the rest of my life, working in. And that has led me to starting a company called Stay Altered, which I guess can tie into the pivot. Stay Altered was originally a concept that was going to help hostel owners, the places that I was volunteering at, come together and help each other out. And so we wanted to build a global community of trusted hostel owner operators who stood for something and help them represent themselves the same way a hostel brand like Generator or Selena could do so while staying independent. And of course, this thing called COVID struck. And a lot of the hostel owners that we spoke to, who were actually, scary enough, doing quite well even into April and some into May of 2020, we originally thought this was maybe the end of hosteling or the end of social living, and very quickly realized it was the opposite, that COVID was starting to fray the social fabric and tear it apart. And that once we were on the other side of this pandemic, our ability to connect, to live, to share was going to be much more demanded, much more needed and desired than ever before. And how we were going to do that was going to be our pivot, which was how we expand from just pure hosteling to some of the concepts that John just mentioned, and really looking at all of alternative accommodations and saying, how can we build a brand? How can we build a community that just stands for more than shared living, but shared economies, shared ownership, cooperative ways of creating businesses, of creating hospitality. So I'll also kind of pause it there, since I think we might talk about some of these things, and flip the mic to Michaela or back to Sandhya, or you tell me.
Yeah, Michaela, are you in a place to introduce yourself? Oh, well, we just lost her, so we will come back to we'll come back to Michaela.
Great Kenya Wi-Fi, I guess.
Yeah. So it's quite appropriate in a panel about travel that one of our panelists is currently traveling. So she's en route to Kenya on a stop in Doha and connecting to the Wi-Fi there. So we'll come back to Michaela. But I do just want to jump into, this conversation. Each of you have companies that I noticed some common words, people, places, purpose, and planet. And so I would love for, each of you, maybe pick one of those words that really means a lot to you, and how do you see that role changing as travel progresses? So whoever wants to jump in.
I'll go first. So it's an interesting one because people, place, purpose is almost the foundation of Unsettled. It's how we design experiences. It's really the philosophy we take when looking at how do we curate and execute on incredible experiences. Those 3 ingredients of people, place, purpose. Planet is tucked into purpose, environment, and how we look at the planet is kind of tucked into our purpose. So we don't add a 4P, we stick to 3. I'm going to take people, because for us, we are an experience where strangers come together, people who've never met who are meeting there for the first time, who oftentimes become family at the end of that experience. When we look at for us, the experience is made by the people who come, right? We can create all these types of activities. We can create incredible accommodations. We can create a great place to work. We can drop people in an amazing environment like Bali. But unless you have the right kind of people coming with the right kind of attitude of co-creating experience, of participating and being active creators of an experience, we feel like we would have nothing. So for Unsettled and what we do, yes, place is important. Yes, purpose is important. Yes, planet is essential in terms of how we think about it. But in terms of what actually creates an incredible travel experience, it is the people and how they show up. How that's going to look in the future is an interesting question, but I'll just stop on that one of what it means to us.
Perfect.
I see Michaela here, but I actually want to jump in really quickly, and then can we pass the mic to Michaela, because I really like what John just said, and I'll make this fast. So I actually agree. There were 4 Ps there, Sandhya, but we have a similar approach or similar methodology. I actually like what you said about how planet and purpose are wrapped up together. And the way we've been thinking about our Ps is that when we think about people and places and planet, that actually in combination allows us to achieve purpose. And when we just isolate for one and not the other two, or when we aren't integrating how we're thinking about what we're offering, then we can lose that purpose there. How we balance, working with great people who have great places and are trying to do something more meaningful for the planet is what kind of defines our purpose altogether. And I will also pick people as well, because what it comes down to at the end of the day for us is going right back to the people. It's about working at the local community owner operator level and giving them the tools, the collaborative tools and the cooperative tools to be able to, achieve more than they can do as an independent owner operator of a hospitality establishment. And hopefully this expands to, tour operators, anybody who's doing tourism at the local community level. That's the kind of cooperation we're thinking of.
Michaela, I'm going to pass the mic over to you and just give you a couple minutes to introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you?
Hi, guys. Sorry for the dramatic entrance. I have just arrived in Doha via New York and en route to Kenya. So I am stinky, but luckily cameras can't smell yet. And it's my first time back in Africa. And actually, it's kind of fun. So my company's called Oh, the People You Meet. I only heard part of your question, which had people, places, and purposes. And that's actually literally our editorial tagline for the content company that I created. And Oh, the People You Meet, we created it 9 years ago, exactly to next week, which is really, really exciting. And I flew Qatar Airways on the way over here, which is one of the first partners that I had ever filmed. And I'm going to Kenya, which is the first place I ever visited when I started my company. So it feels like it's all just very serendipitously coming together. My former corporate life, I left 9 years ago, and I was a VP of Global Travel and Strategic Development for American Express. But the multiple things happening on a business front, none of the brands, even though I loved the brands I worked with, were speaking to why I liked to travel. And then also advertising and publishing was changing and no one had a solution I believed in. So I had to go figure out the video, digital, social space. And some of my best clients are still the clients that I still work with all these 9 years later. And Oh, the People You Meet's grown. We have 110 global contributors from everywhere. We focus on people, places, and purposes, or it doesn't get published on our site. We're still an ad-free platform. I make my money other ways, like doing public speaking. I teach storytelling, travel storytelling at NYU. And I have 3 video series now. One is called Michaela's Map, which is the how-to and the who to know when you go to a destination. So you really dig beneath the surface. And then I have 2 more that I launched in response to COVID. So always be pivoting is also our MO, never get too comfy. One, I had to look at what was going on during the early days of the pandemic from a 1-bedroom rainy apartment in New York City. And I was like, well, what is my gift that we can give to the world? And that was that Oh, the People You Meet had already built the digital platforms. We already had a global community, and we already had mad, amazing, inspiring contacts from all across the globe. So Inspiration Station, I had to throw my type A perfectionism and executive producer right out the window and be like, okay, we're going to do this over Zoom. And sometimes people have bad connections and people's moms are going to jump in and like their kid is going to like be bugging them. And like, I've had executives call in pajamas, drinking martinis. Like, it's just been a really like fun, I call it COVID compassion. I feel like we're all just getting to know each other as humans, and like the facade has worn off a little bit, which has been really nice. And so we've actually done 110 episodes of Inspiration Station. We've had 4.5 million views on IGTV. And then September 9th, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I still wear like 95s everywhere I go and look like a crazy person and use lots of hand sanitizer. But September 9th, we started a show called Sleeping Around Again Safely. And so that's what I'm en route to do in Kenya with a couple great hotel partners over there. So that's kind of the kitchen sink, but hopefully a nice top line summary.
Yeah, and I'm going to really challenge your jet lag brain here, but of those 4 words, people, purpose, place, and planet, which one of those do you think will change the most in how we look at travel over the next, say, 10 years?
Well, I mean, all of them tie back to people. So without the people, like none of those things are going to happen. And as a founder of Oh, the People You Meet, I mean, I just love my people and my humans. So I'm going to go with all about like connecting with people and inspiring people. And like Megs, who introduced me to all of you, I first met Megs filming an episode at Burning Man, and she's a hard person not to fall in love with. But the premise of that episode that I was trying to create there was to show, everybody has these stereotypes of what Burning Man is or isn't, or what happens there. And it kind of all coexist, if I were to be very honest. But my point, and the people that I interviewed, Megs included, was these are all just really badass humans that are coming together, and it's a wonderful creative outlet. And I met some big movers and shakers all across the globe that were all coming together and like who formed these deep friendships that really created lasting change. And I mean, I've even had people I met at Burning Man contribute to my site on the topics of sustainability and saving the planet and like tiny homes and water conservation and being vegan. So I've made some really, really interesting connections there that have introduced me to new things that I'm now totally obsessed with.
Great, I love it. Yeah, and quite interestingly, or not interestingly at all of you chose people, which is place might be the obvious one in a conversation about travel, but it really is all about the people that you meet along the way. And
there's no messages.
If we could just ask everybody that's not on the panel to go on mute, that would be great. And I'm gonna give us a little bit of shift in direction here and talk about some things that are really meaningful to each of your businesses. So I'm gonna start with Evan. Evan, one of the big themes of your company, Stay Altered, is meaningful hospitality. And you guys approach that in a very holistic way, all the way from the investment stages through to truly integrating into a culture in a conscious way. So can you speak a little bit to this, supply chain, so to speak, in travel and how your company thinks about it?
Yeah, unlike Michaela and John, we're just now starting to think about how we raise money, how we organize governance, and a lot of it is very, very boring, to be very honest. Very droll stuff when you get into things like tax compliance and ownership, but it is unfortunately where a lot of the real, I think, juicy, meaty stuff when it comes to creating meaningful companies, especially in hospitality, shows up. So long story short, a lot of the hospitality industry uses models such as franchising, third-party owner operating, and these usually come with really great services, but unfortunately extractive fees and difficult contracts that when you get to the local community level, especially in, say, some developing countries or with developing entrepreneurs who are just getting into hospitality, even in developed nations, can be very complex and sometimes wind up being very punitive. So what we're trying to do when we talk about meaningful hospitality is put hospitality back into the hospitality industry. How can we develop ownership models that are more cooperative? And they're really alternative ownership models that are not like any of the traditional models that are seen in the industry. another thing that we're trying to do is understand how we can empower operators to build communities locally. So we're working truly with independent owner operators as well, which we think, I'm biased, but these are some of the most rewarding places to stay. These are some of the most rewarding experiences in my own travels have been with local, independent, and authentic owner operators. How do we help them help each other? So solidarity being another big theme when we talk about meaningful hospitality is, can we get all of the, let's say, independent hoteliers and hosteliers and maybe Todos Santos or some of these other tourism destinations to collaborate and cooperate. And hopefully with that, comes our support to then be able to speak to guests, to speak to a world of travelers and show that, meaningful hospitality obviously is sustainable, it's authentic, it's at the local level, but it also has to have this kind of economic framework of things like stewarded ownership and purpose that's aligned with profits. So that's kind of how we think about meaningful hospitality. And I really should stop there because I could go on, and we'll leave it at that.
Well, I'd actually love to have you give us an example of how it all comes together. Is there a specific location or experience or group of owners that you've worked with that you kind of want to highlight?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. So one of the pivots that we've had as well, tying back to that P of pivoting, was originally envisioning a global cooperative where we could bring hosts in Southeast Asia, in Europe, Australia, Latin America, the Americas all together and say, hey, we have this vision for a global hospitality company. I think if you really look at most global companies, it's like, especially in hospitality, it's a bunch of it's like you're setting up 180 local companies. There's really no way to scale a global business without really getting into the nitty gritty within each country, sometimes within each municipality. So we've had to really retool our strategy and say, okay, how do we come into a community and meet the owners, meet the community members? And right now I'm here in Todos Santos, Mexico, been here for about a month and a half around Baja Sur, just going owner to owner, which is really difficult and challenging to do during COVID. So a lot of outdoor distance meetings and just really trying to understand, hey, how can we best serve you? How can we best help you right now? What are the things that we can do? And then kind of working through some of the models for that is saying, well, there are ways that we can come in and we can take over your business or we can take over the management, but these are the costs that come along with that. Are there other ways where we can do it? And best of all, what if you were to all help each other out? And that's been a hard sell at the front, but what we're seeing now is, for the first time, some of these hosts talking to each other. They've always been in contact with each other. Some of them have WhatsApp groups where they keep in contact with things that are popping up. Sometimes it's about bed bugs, sometimes it's about bad guests, sometimes it's about other things. But for the most part, now there's conversations about okay, how do we market together? How do we reach our guests together? How do we maybe invest in technology together? And that's just one example of how we're working with hosts here.
And Evan, I was going to throw in there because when I left American Express 9 years ago, some of the content that we focused on was that I thought travelers, if given a choice, would have a conscience and would choose companies, sorry, I have a frog in my throat, would choose companies that they knew were giving back. And so to me, in the very funniest of ways, Africa has always been at the forefront. In these very rural areas where wilderness safaris or my brain is kind of mush right now, Singida, there's some really amazing safari companies that have come in and they've provided exactly that support. And so you see them leasing the land from the local people and then promising the local people or the chiefs of that particular community that they will employ people from the community. And often when you employ someone from one of these communities, you're supporting not only them, but their whole extended family on the salary. Yeah. And what's been really awesome is even in the 9 years since I've been to Kenya, I still am in touch with some of the guides that I met and some of the kids that have been now raised up through the ranks and are starting to get jobs with those companies. And they're starting to be exposed to international tourism. And ultimately, after the lease is up, some of these different places like African parks are going to turn that back over to the local people once it's up and operational. So it's a really empowering thing to see.
100%. And there's actually somebody here with Devin, I think Nicola from Cape Town. I know she used to work with Go to Africa. She's been helping with Stay Altered a little bit. And her background is in working with African safaris and evaluating who, who are the operators of safaris that are doing things differently, who are the ones that are looking at things like community land trusts or, stewarded ownership of properties, of building hospitality businesses that have a real kind of profit sharing model, or sometimes an equity sharing model that ties right back to the local community. It's really hard to find these businesses out there, and it's really hard to make sure that these companies are actually doing what they say. And when you hear about these stories,
that's why you trust your journalist friends who have already been doing the work for you.
That's exactly it. And it's about finding companies like Unsettled and finding people like Michaela, and like, we just have to build that story, and we have to kind of get people to kind of pull the layers back a little bit more and go, okay, what is the model that's working here? How is this organization structured, and who are the owners, and how is that profit distributed? It's tough, but how do we tell that story is like, I think that's where I look to you and I say, okay, Michaela is probably going in the right direction with this.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because the topic I wanted to ask Michaela about was storytelling. So
excellent.
You teach about storytelling, you do a lot of it. It is the core of what you do. And so I'd love for you to speak a little bit about how does storytelling play a role in the future of travel?
Yeah, no, I mean, even like looking back to, again, like the kind of the business side of why I started Oh, the People You Meet. And that was just that none of the publishing companies, and I had worked at almost all of them, really had a good grasp on digital, social, or video. And so when I started my company, the word influencer didn't exist yet. Instagram was online, but it was like not totally a thing yet. But I knew there was something there. And so, when I teach at NYU, people are like, well, I'm a YouTube star, or I'm an aspiring Instagram star, whatever the case might be. And I was like, no. Like, the real first influencers were actually editors of magazines and newspaper, like journalists. They were the ones that were out there. They were getting the stories. They were storytelling, but it just wasn't called that back then. So I like people to like get away from like, I write, or I'm a broadcast journalist, or I'm on Instagram, because by the way, we kind of all have to do all of those things now anyway. And the world's, we used to have church and state, like editorial and business side of publishing. That's all mushed together. Anyone in advertising can appreciate that. But it's just, what is the purpose of the story that you're trying to tell? Who are you trying to reach? And whether you're doing it on Instagram, or you're doing it on Zoom, or an article in Forbes, or whatever the case might be, that's just your platform. And so it might like look and feel a little bit different. But I do think there's like some core things that are happening that are only, I do a lot of trend predictions at the end of every year. And I had predicted things like sustainability and giving back, the importance of local connection and immersion, transformative and well-being travel. And I had predicted all of these before I even knew what COVID was. And in the funniest of ways, now I have to add safety measures to that, but all of those predictions are only made more relevant by the pandemic. And so, I think to be a good storyteller, you have to sit back and be like, am I writing a piece of marketing for Evan's company? And like, who am I trying to target with that message? Who am I trying to attract? Because you tell a different story to attract local people that he'd want to help empower to run their businesses more strategically, and whether it's scaling it. And then you that same company could have a different message to attract the consumers to use the platform. So it's just, I think, being very aware of who you're trying to communicate to. And more than ever, I think it's all about doing it in an authentic voice. You really only have, like, your only street cred is, I think, your worth. And like, you have to be honest and tried and true. And sometimes it's not always the pretty and most glamorous. And old corporate Michaela would have never gotten on this call, like not having showered and after flying for 12 hours. But that's just it. So here's my real story. I'm sitting in an airport lounge, stinky as, but that's okay. And I think that will continue. And, I think when I'm, if I'm on a morning show or something, I know that I'm talking to like probably moms that are home, or people that probably don't have big corporate jobs or something like that. So I tailor my messaging to who I think that I'm speaking to. And also they're a little bit more bubbly and a little more conservative on the TV networks. And when I'm on Instagram, a little bit more casual and like approachable, because I have a younger audience who probably do have jobs and are sneaking away from their job to tune in to whatever I'm doing. So know your audience, I think, is always the first thing.
Yeah, I love it. And we could be watching you on Instagram at the same time we're on mute on a conference call, or like, on a Zoom meeting or things like that.
Yes.
Such is the world today, which is, again, a great segue into, the lines are completely blurred, right? We mentioned you've got executives in pajamas or people with their moms running around in the room in the background. And so I want to toss it over to Jonathan and have you talk a little bit about, work and life. There's not much of a line between the two anymore. And so how do we think about this blurring of work and life, and now the ability to travel and be in lots of different places? And what does work-life design and travel have to do with each other?
Yeah, the short answer is everything. I think to a lot of the points people are making here, we're showing up with our full selves more and more and more. And what COVID has shown is that we now have to show up to work with our full selves, or we should, or that boundary is coming away, or getting to, whatever way you want to look at it, with fear, with apprehension, with excitement, however it affects you. We started running co-working, co-living retreats back in 2014 was our sort of first experiment, when we got almost 40 people from all over the world in Bali for 1 month to live and work and explore and play. And that was not happening, right? Back then, there was still connectivity issues. There were still not that many co-working spaces in the world. There were still, there were these trends that, okay, there's a group of people who are working more independently. The gig economy was starting to take off. We were getting more independence and freelance, but remote work wasn't a mainstream thing. And so, flash forward to the time that we've been around, almost 7, 8 years since then, we are in such a dramatically different place, right? And we know that the way that we work tends to affect where we live, who we associate with, our communities, what we do, our activities. Work is an organizing principle of our lives. And now, it was already in a trend where we were able to work from anywhere. A certain group of people were able to work from anywhere. With COVID, we've now proven that many of us can work from anywhere, right? We have now been forced, and companies at the corporate level have been forced to adapt in a way that gives us an incredible amount of freedom and flexibility. And so with that, what's been interesting now is, what do we do with that choice, right? As a society, as employees, as employers, if we now have a choice of where we can work from, and if the infrastructure that was not there 6, 7, 8 years ago of co-working spaces, of fast internet, of Airbnbs, of basically the ability to drop into a city at any time and be able to be comfortable and be productive and be connected and have community, how do we design our lives around that, right? That's our fundamental question at Unsettled, is if you have this choice now, how do you go about making it, and how do you design for that? And I think this is a question that is happening a lot. We're working a lot with big companies, from Fortune 10 companies to startups, who now have a lot of employees who are asking this question of, what can I do, right? How do I now adapt to this new reality? If I can choose where I live, if I can choose how I show up, if I can begin to have choice around these things that were once so tied to my work, what's that process like? And then how do I show up at work when I'm there? And how do I connect with colleagues in a remote setting? All that kind of stuff. So we've had a lot of fun playing with those questions. I mean, I think it's a big time of self-exploration. It's a big time of work exploration. It's a big time of community exploration, of how we belong in these sort of environments that we're all doing virtually now. But once kind of the pandemic slows down, we're not going to be on Zoom. We're going to be meeting in Bali. We're going to be meeting in Barcelona. We're going to be meeting in Baja. And all the things that we're learning about how we can kind of work in this distributed setting will begin to start happening in physical distributed settings, as opposed to just in a Zoom room. So I think it's a super exciting time. There's a lot of opportunity to, I think, explore how we come together. And then not to speak of obviously all the impacts that this type of travel will have on the travel industry itself. So how it's going to need to reorient itself around the working professional, right? And how it's going to need to begin to either erase the lines between leisure and business travel, or to create new categories or spaces that accommodate to a different kind of traveler. So yeah, there's a lot in there, but we're excited for it once we can actually leave our homes.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea about what types of travel are out there, and is it living and working and kind of setting up shop in another country for maybe a longer period of time? Is it something more experiential, like Evan, what you're providing, where it's like you're fully immersed in a local community, maybe for a shorter period of time, but really like soaking up that culture in a way that's very intentional and conscious. So I'd love to hear from any of you guys, like how do you see these different buckets maybe coming about, or maybe coming together and merging into one big bucket? I don't know.
Well, I was actually on a call with about 400 like C-level executives from the travel industry 2 days ago. And we're talking like heads of Hyatt, Hilton, travel agencies, airlines, et cetera. And those calls are very interesting. Well, I mean, one, because I've been in the industry and they're very dear people to me, but to hear these like big corporations, like understanding of like, what is the future of travel? Because they want to know that too. And, from a traditional hotel perspective, someone like a Hyatt and a Hilton, even a Marriott, they've all created that kind of what they call like the lifestyle tier, where you're still getting kind of a luxury experience. You still get your rewards points, whatever, but they have super strong Wi-Fi. They leave you alone. It's not as high touch point service. It's not quite as expensive. And they have that kind of co-working space situation in the common area of that hotel. And so a trend prediction I had years ago was actually, because when I worked at Amex, I oversaw our global offices. So I was on the road 3 weeks a month. And I was like, well, why do I have to have a company of people that need offices? I don't want to manage them like that. Actually, they're adults. And if they're not, I'll know, and we're not a good fit. So that has been my employment model for the past 9 years. And so going into a destination like Tulum, for example, if you look at that, I feel like that was this boho chic, super cool place, really cool, like bungalowy hotels, locally owned, not a ton of infrastructure. Even a few years ago, the Wi-Fi was absolutely terrible. It's gotten better, but it's still not great. Now, because of the pandemic, half of New York, LA, San Francisco, London have like geo relocated to Tulum. But now you're seeing like better Wi-Fi, more hotels opening, including the first ever branded hotel in a loft, which is part of Starwood Marriott, that's going to be there in Tulum, not right on the beach. But I was like, uh-oh, that's like the beginning of like the cool little indie place, like getting a branded hotel. And I have mixed feelings about it all.
Yeah, certainly. And so that's one end of the spectrum. And then Evan, what you do is on the very other end of the spectrum, I feel. So what do you have to
It is, and
contribute on that?
as you're seeing the entire spectrum is reacting to this, right? And I can't remember if it was you, Sandhya, or John who said the lines are blurring, but this is exactly it. I mean, I just saw, Amelia, you popped into chat that you're starting, or you're part of a startup that's working on a real estate and community project here in Mexico. Co-living, co-working is what, we call it maybe within this community. You've got Airbnb, all of the other short-term, mid-term, long-term companies and startups that are also really trying to figure this out, this blurring of living. And then what Michaela was talking about, the lifestyle segment of hospitality, is also saying, well, we've been moving this way for years. And so everybody's kind of converging right now on this blurring. And this is probably the big question that our entire industry is going to try and answer with a lot of real big solutions in the next decade or so, is how do we address this idea that hotels are going to start moving into long-term experiences or mid-term experiences. Home sharing and short-term rentals also want to get into long-term, but even companies like long-term communities and and maybe even originally co-living and co-working communities that were set up for monthly or quarterly or yearly rentals are going to try and figure out how to do rentals for a day, for an hour, for a weekend. Everybody is going to come with their solution or their vision for what this looks like. And I think what we're going to see is that just totally hybridized, blurred future where everybody will have a different way to attack this kind of sticky challenge, because the reality is this: the thing that very few people, I think, are really thinking about right now is the short-term challenge. When travel does come back, every indication is, and this is from Google searches, from OTA searches, from what we're seeing anecdotally on social media, is like, as soon as it's safe and ethical to travel again, I'm going to do it. And I want places that are safe and ethical to travel to. And there's very little of that supply, and there's a lot of that demand. So you're going to see destinations, I think, like Tulum and Bali, these kind of, they have been exciting destinations for a while, but they're just going to get crushed even more so than they already have. And we're not really sure those communities are prepared for the level of interest that they're going to get. It's going to move away from cities probably for a few years. I love cities. I lived in New York for 10 years. I would never bet against New York ever. But, you know, like the places that Michaela was talking about are probably going to be very interesting to a much larger group of travelers. And
the nature getaways, for sure, cities, I totally agree with, are going to have a harder time. However, one thing I did want to say is I literally haven't had a home since mid-June. And I've been traveling around and staying in hotels or renting places. And I've always been a gypsy. But I'm really, 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 really impressed by how everywhere outside of the United States has handled COVID. They've done like such a better job than us. And even returning from Mexico a couple weeks ago, I literally was asked at Newark, there was just a sign and it was like, scan in your test results. And I was like, who in their right mind is going to scan in their test results so that you can like come chase me around? No, you need to enforce that. And not like I just want you to understand what's happening right now. This guy will not leave me alone with a glass of champagne. Fine, I'll drink it.
I don't know why this is the problem, Michaela.
I was trying to be professional. Meg said no alcohol.
Can there's something
interesting.
Yeah,
so I want to come back to this idea of like what we do when borders open up. But Jonathan, I want to give you a chance first to weigh in on this, like types of travel and how these things are merging or maybe staying separate. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, it speaks to, I think, a lot of what Michaela's saying and Evan's saying as well is, you know, how do we define the separation of travel and living right now? And how are we going to separate that definition going forward? Because Michaela, are you traveling? Have you been traveling the past 6 months? Are you spending 1 month in a place, 3 months in a place? Like, what is that definition of what we consider a traveler? And, you know, I don't like to use the word nomad and global nomad, digital nomad. There's a lot associated with that term and it's quite loaded. But, you know, I think people are recognizing those who have been fortunate enough to be able to travel during the pandemic are going somewhere for an extended period of time. You know, my friend moved with his entire family from Seattle to Baja for like 4 months, right? They came for 1 month and stayed for 4. And so is that traveling? And it's hard to say because people are starting to live for longer periods of time. And what is their mentality? What are they looking for? What are they, you know, what is going to cater to them? How do we classify them? It's just this, it's now become accessible to people given that change in work that you don't have to be somewhere. And so that bucket is really interesting, right? It's unexplored. Is it an Airbnb or is it a long-term hotel? Is it actually something in between? Are people going to start leasing properties in a certain place? And so I just think we have to begin to look at how
Jonathan, to your point, I feel like we talked about this, and forgive me if it's my jet lag brain, but I had a recent example, like not even last month. I was in Mexico and I'd never heard of this hotel before. I'd put it in the luxury lifestyle set, but it's not like super white glove or anything, and it's still somewhat affordable. All the things I loved about it, it's called Hotel Palmaya. It's in Playa del Carmen, so it's close to Tulum, but not in Tulum. It's on the beach. They have big rooms. People are coming. They have long-term rates, so you can come and you can stay for a few weeks. They have a free wellness program. So if you're like living there, you can do free yoga, you can do sound baths. Like literally every day they have free wellness programming. And I don't have children, but they have a Waldorf school there.
Mhm.
So I was like,
Yeah.
for parents who always thought they were so trapped, you know, in
Yeah.
wherever the heck they live to bring their kids to school, I was like, whoa, this is the first time I've seen like a
Yeah.
real hotel though have something like that. And I was like,
Oh.
that's interesting.
Speaking of the traveling buckets, the family traveler, I mean, this friend moved down with his entire family. Now that younger education has been able to go online, while it's not ideal, parents are going to realize for the first time, I don't have to live in this suburb, or I don't have to live in this place. I could actually live in different places at different times. I think there's going to be a revolution in terms of how parents can design their lives to give their kids a very global education and a global experience in a way that they could never before, right? You don't have to stick within the 2-week holiday limit of spring break or of Christmas so there's a lot happening, I think, in that space as well. But, you know, the one thing that we've noticed of extended stays is we've always done, 30-day experiences. People live, they shop local, they experience local, they feel like a local, and that is very different. And where they spend their money and where it goes and who it supports is so different than somebody who comes for a week or a weekend or, and that kind of traveler is, I think, the kind that is going to speak to and support a lot of things that we're talking about and looking at and trying to, I think, envision for how travel can be more sustainable and conscious, and use your favorite word for how we can have a better future. But yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was gonna have you hop in on this. Go for it.
I think it will go beyond families, and we'll talk about what the future is going to look like for senior citizens and for aging-friendly communities, integrated communities, pop-up communities that will exist and disappear after, let's say, a company's sprint is accomplished, to when a long-term and kind of sustainable project is done within a community that needs that expertise from outside their social circle or their community unit. And this will also, I mean, families is absolutely fascinating, right? Because what you have here is the education component, and what does a dispersed, decentralized, yet available anywhere, anytime education experience look like? I can't imagine what it must be like to be going to school via Zoom right now, and it's a reality for hundreds of millions of families around the world. So there's a lot that's going to change super quickly, and our hope is, as these lines blur, it would be really great to see these communities integrate more. I think, John, you talk about like the tension of the sticky or thorniness that is the nomad community. And it's like, there is a thorniness to it. There is a thorniness to a wellness community, a digital nomad community, even an aging community or a senior citizen community. And that's because they are all really segregated. And I think for any of us here who have been to Burning Man or have been a part of integrated communities, that diversity, that's like that integration of aging populations and young populations, of digital nomads and like local, long time, generationally lived here people and communities, that's kind of what makes travel and living fascinating. So as these lines blur, the hope is
that's a mindset versus like an age group.
That's exactly it. It's how do we orient people to be open to living and traveling like this moving forward.
And how do we get regulations to catch up with it?
Yeah.
That's a whole another thing. We don't have time for that
Well,
conversation.
but like Mexico, Americans can live in Mexico for like up to 3 months at a time. Like I know a lot of people that just hop a flight to Miami, spend the weekend, and then go back again.
I think it's 180 days, right? 120, it's something long.
Half a year.
Yeah, I knew it was
180 days. Yeah.
Canadians and Americans and many people are using this opportunity and actually spend all winter in Mexico in different cities, and I'm following them.
Wonderful. So I did want to ask each of the panelists, as you each have talked about some of the things that you want to, or will see things blurring in the future and how travel is going to change. What's something that you think we should stop or might not happen anymore in the future of travel?
Ooh.
Over tour destinations. I mean, we did a whole thing on this at Unsettled. It's like a year or two ago. We did like Instagrammable destinations, and anyways, we're poking fun at some over toured places. And I think that and it's a double-edged sword, to be honest, where people are going to try and stop going to the top destination or the place that, everybody recommends, that Instagram perfect shot, whatever, and start trying to go more off the beaten path. And to, I think, a lot of what Evan's been saying, and Michaela too, if they don't have a pathway to do that in the right way, if there isn't infrastructure for them to go out to more off the beaten track places, there's a risk of tourism being damaging in some of those places that don't have the infrastructure. But I do think people are going to be a lot more open to risk and going off the beaten path and not going to places that everybody else goes to all the time and really looking for something undiscovered. So that's one change I definitely see happening. Yeah.
I was going to say, to piggyback on that, I mean, the content that we create, like when I started with the people you meet, nobody really knew what sustainable travel was. There was like me and a marine biologist at an adventure travel conference talking about it. And people thought I was like this weird hippie. Maybe I am. But I think that being able to openly talk about sustainability, now people, they shun you if you use a plastic straw. So it's really great now that every one of the major hotel brands don't have single-use plastics anymore. I mean, even Norwegian Cruise Lines got rid of single-use plastics in 2019, and that's huge. So I think consumers, and I think it started because of social media, we should vocalize our opinion. And by the way, it's up to us to be super responsible. So I always put it back on the traveler to make responsible decisions. And it's up to you to do research too. Great, go somewhere for a month, but are you supporting a local community? Are you staying at a sustainable place? What's their commitment to making it happen? And so I try to help cover companies that are sustainable, or people that I think are making a difference, or trailblazers that are doing a great job. But then I also throw it back on the people that follow me or read me or watch me or whatever the heck they're doing, to start asking questions. And it's been an uphill battle, but it's been exciting to be on Good Morning Washington and CBS, and them allowing me to start talking about sustainable travel and destinations and experiences that people can have. So it's a mindset shift, and I think people are getting there. And again, I think COVID has made everyone have more time in front of screens, whether we like it or not. And so I think more people have been introduced to concepts. So I think it's up to all of us to continue to spread the good word, not COVID, and get out there.
That's amazing. And actually, I wanted to, give each person a chance to weigh on this topic, because we've talked about some pretty big ideas around how the future of travel is going to change, and how, on a really high level, the way that we look at travel, or just life in different places, right? Living life in different places will come into play. And so I'd love to hear from Jonathan or Evan on this, okay, and I'll give you, Michaela, I'll give you another chance to add back in, but in the short term, right, as borders open up, how can each of us as individuals listening and learning today be responsible with our travel as we start to have an opportunity to do more of that?
That's hard. And I think short term, is it this year or in the next few years? But, one thing that comes to mind is actually, I was thinking about what is one thing that I'd like to see not stop in tourism. And I love a good bucket list, but I think the bucket listing of I'm going to hit a destination once and then never go back because I've got this insane bucket. Listen, I used to bucket list, so I'm very guilty of this. But maybe instead of going to a place you haven't been before, short term, go back somewhere you've already been, or go back to a community that you had visited before COVID, or maybe a long time ago, and go back and say hi, go back to the places you went to. If you stayed at a hotel before, go visit them again if they're still operating, or a restaurant, reinvest in that community and stick around, or see how you can support that community now. Listen, everybody's going to need help. Share about it. Yeah, that would be huge. The ethics of traveling during COVID are really, really blurry as well. And so short term, if traveling does happen, it's how can you invest in a community as much as possible? And how can you really contribute and add value in a way that goes maybe beyond a couple tourism dollars? That would be my hope.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. So Jonathan, I'm going to go to you, and then Michaela, I'm going to give you the last word.
Evan, you just took it. I actually don't know what more I can say to that. I think it's just being conscious. Like every time you travel, every single time you get off a plane, a bus, a car, whatever, locally, internationally, you are making a choice and you are representing. So as a foreigner to wherever you are representing a lot of things, right? You're representing who is coming in, who they're attracting, your culture, your society. So you have a responsibility. How do you want to represent where you're coming from? And how do you want to make a local impact on where you are? And it is come down to how you engage, how you connect, who you connect with, but it also comes down to where you spend your money. And people are hurting coming out of COVID. I mean, the industry is in a very challenging position. And so the smaller providers, the smaller boutique hotels or experience providers, like they are suffering. And so the more that you can make choices to work with them over, I'd say, some large institution, nothing against large hotels and brands and chains, but the more you're going to have a potentially positive impact on local economy and also begin to move the needle towards a more sustainable form of tourism. So that's what I think.
And for the most part, I agree. But something that we all need to be a little careful about with like, the big brands and making them like a big enemy, tourism, and this is according to the World Tourism Organization, is 1 in 10 jobs on the planet. And it is one of the largest GDPs. And so without those big guys, pardon my French, shit will crumble. And a lot of the bigger brands have become more conscious because of the movement of the smaller and the hyper local, and have made commitments to employing local people. And so, even if you do have Marriott Bonvoy points and like you want to use them, good on you. I do think it's great to get out into the world and open your eyes, minds, and hearts. But do a little research. Is that hotel employing local people? Like, what's their commitment to that community? And by the way, like Wilderness Safari started off as a small little safari company, and now they're arguably one of the largest across Africa. But they built sustainably and power, and they employ local people, and like African parks who manage national parks all across Africa. Like they come in, they restore a park, they restore the wildlife, they build up the community, and then they empower the community. And the plan is within 5 years, they turn it over as a working operation to the local community. And they help attract in lodges, whether they're international or locally owned, but again, with a commitment to employ. And so I want to be careful because I do think a lot of the big corporations have started to become more hip to it and more conscious. And by the way, if we don't have our airlines, how are you getting that? Okay. So like everybody's got to work together. And, I think JetBlue is a great example of someone who's like made a strong and public commitment to be carbon neutral. And by the way, all the other airlines had to start following suit, because once one of them do it, but Norwegian Cruise Lines going plastic free, like all the other ones had to start doing that too. So I think it's about having conversation. I think it's about doing your research. Like, again, I put it back on the traveler to be responsible, and to researching before you go, to understand like, well, what's my impact here? And like one little thing I'll say is a pretty, I think, conscious person and pretty well researched and very well traveled. I went to Cambodia with the best of intentions, and I'm filming this piece, and I was even going to film a piece of young women that had been saved from trafficking. And you would think, oh, that's a good thing. But then actually there's all these other subtle nuances that happen, and you see all these like kids in the street and they're begging. And actually what I came to find out, like by me going to like follow the cute little singing kid to the orphanage, is like they have free education in Cambodia. And then I was helping like keep the poverty cycle alive by them not being in school and then performing for me and begging instead of being in class that day. Now, I can't totally take all that on, but like the second I learned like what I was being a part of, a systematic like ploy, I was like, oh no, I got to speak up against this. And rather than me do it, I'm going to create an educational piece for travelers going to that destination. And then I'm going to work with someone local on the ground who can be the local voice for helping other travelers that come in, because I'm just the outsider looking in for that short amount of time that I was there.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the theme there, right, is do your research and ask the questions. that you may not have asked before in your travels, and really understand what your impact is on a place, on the people, on the planet as well. So great. Well, on that note, we're at the end of our panel. So I want to thank each of the guests here, Jonathan Kalan, Evan Tzeng, and Michaela Guzy, like Fuzzy. I always have to remember that. So you guys have been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom with everybody.
Thank you.
I know that each of the speakers is highlighted on the website for Reinventaissance. So if you want to check out their websites, follow them on social media, get in touch with them, you can find all of that information there. And about, I guess, 7 minutes now. So at the top of the hour, everyone can go back to the main room. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to take a break, get some food, whatever you need to do. And then you can join back in the main room for, I think there's a performance burst next. So. Thank you.
Bye, guys. It's such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody. Sandhya, thank you
all
for
this together, and thank you, everybody.
Amazing. Thanks, guys.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.